Welcome back, everyone. Magistra Vitae has given us so much so far. Now we are on the start of the First Punic War. We did the Punic Wars via Oversimplified. We even did the Punic Wars via History March. All that content is on our channel already. But I love this channel. We're gonna do it. Started the First Punic War by Magistra Vitae. Make sure you go subscribe to them if you haven't already. Their content is amazing, so hype them up, guys. I appreciate you all. Let's jump right in.
In 289 BC, Agathocles, the tyrant of Syracuse, died. Upon his death, many of the mercenary groups he employed were left without a job.
Sorry, let's back that up because I was adjusting the volume.
In 289 BC, Agathocles, the tyrant of Syracuse, died. Upon his death, many of the mercenary groups he employed were left without a job. One of these groups, the Mamertines, who enjoyed the Sicilian climate, decided to stay. They took control of a small trading town Messana and turned it into a raiding outpost. They were disrupting trade in the area, and a young despot from Syracuse, Hiero, decided to put an end to this nuisance. After defeating them in battle, Hiero set siege to Messana. Desperate, the Mamertines appealed to Carthage for help. They agreed and took control of the city, forcing Hiero back to Syracuse. The Mamertines, however, were not happy with this new arrangement, and this time appealed to Rome for help.
Natural sworn ally to Carthage, but I don't know.
Although the Senate was reluctant at first, a promise of new riches awaiting them in Sicily sealed the deal, and the people elected Appius Claudius Caudex as one of the consuls. Appius needed some time to raise an army and secure the ships that would carry them into Sicily. In the meantime, he sent an expeditionary force commanded by his cousin, Gaius Claudius, to secure the crossing and make all the necessary preparations. While trying to cross the Straits of Messina, they were rebuffed by the Carthaginian fleet that was patrolling the area.
And right, I'm not sure if he'll mention this, but very important note, Carthage owned the Mediterranean. Rome didn't really do much shipbuilding, and the shipbuilding they did do was inadequate compared to the Carthaginian fleet. And that's going to be a major crutch for Rome. This entire war is the navy, but Rome adapts.
Hoping that a show of force was enough to deter the Romans from coming into Sicily, the Carthaginians released the prisoners and returned the captured ships. Rather than falling back, Gaius used the cover of darkness and crossed the straits during the night. He immediately opened the negotiations with the Mamertines while he was waiting for the rest of the Roman army. When Appius finally arrived, he also crossed during the night, and all of his force was safely in Sicily. Polybius never mentions Gaius, and it's unclear what the real sequence of the events was. Modern historians question the existence of another commander conveniently named Claudius. What is clear is that all sides were trying to avoid open conflict. There was a great deal of negotiation between the three sides. From this, an unlikely alliance between Carthage and Syracuse was formed. The Mamertines sided with the Romans, forcing the Carthaginian commander to withdraw from the city. When he reported this news to the Senate, he was promptly executed for failing to defend Carthaginian interests.
Yeah, Carthage was ruthless. Ruthless. Rome's ruthless too, but in this sense, ruthless.
And an army was sent into Sicily. In the meantime, Hiero led an army from Syracuse and blockaded the Romans in Messana. Appius was trying to avoid conflict and negotiate with Hiero. But when the negotiations failed, Appius charged out with his men and lifted the siege of the city. Hiero had to retreat all the way back to Syracuse and prepare the defenses of the city. Appius then drove off a small Carthaginian force from the area. Having secured Messana, he marched toward Syracuse and plundered the countryside along the way. This was no more than a show of force, as he had no way of taking the city without naval support. When the campaigning season ended, Appius was recalled back to Rome. Next year, both consuls with full consular armies were sent to Messana.
It's as big as a deal it can. I can't talk. It's as big as a deal as it can be.
It's clear that the Senate now saw Sicily as a strategically important target. The two consuls marched south towards Syracuse. A number of Greek cities along the way pleaded their allegiance to Rome. These cities would stay loyal to Rome for the duration of the war. On the other hand, the alliance between Carthage and Hiero was short-lived. When the consuls appeared near Syracuse, Hiero quickly changed sides and allied with the Romans instead. They would in turn guarantee his safety and an exclusive zone of influence in Sicily. He would stay loyal to Rome for the rest of his long life, and his support proved crucial during the First Punic War. The Romans were no great sailors, and without Hiero, they would be unable to supply their armies on Sicily.
And obviously Syracuse in the Second Punic War switches sides back to Carthage.
All pieces were now in position, and the First Punic War had started in earnest. The Mamertines would eventually fade from history, their final fate still unknown. After these initial skirmishes that went in Roman favor, neither side was willing to back down. The Carthaginians started enlisting a great number of mercenaries, mainly from Spain, with additional troops provided by the Gauls and the Ligurians. They also enlisted help from the Numidian cavalry, a mainstay of the Punic Wars. In 262 BC, the Romans again sent both consuls with full consular armies into Sicily. Each consular army was made up of 2 legions and 2 ali, or allied legions. Each legion was comprised of 4,200 infantry and
So they got like 20k, 40k.
300 cavalry, with each soldier being a Roman citizen. The ali were somewhat larger, with 5,100 infantry and 900 cavalry each.
So they're dang 6. They got like 45,000.
Roman allies provided all the manpower for the ali. This meant that the 2 consuls commanded roughly 40,000 men in total. Meanwhile, in Syracuse, Hiero was stockpiling resources in anticipation of a long campaign. The Romans started moving west, and a large number of settlements in central Sicily joined their side.
So it's a land grab at this point. Just a land grab.
Carthaginians chose Agrigentum as their base of operations, but when the Roman armies reached the city in the summer of 262, most of the troops hadn't yet arrived and the city was poorly defended. The consuls marched together, and when they reached the city, they found that the surrounding fields were deserted. Commander of Agrigentum, Hannibal Gisco,
Funny name.
no relation to the famous Hannibal, ordered all villagers to abandon their homes and take refuge behind the city walls. The population of Agrigentum had swollen to 50,000, but the garrison was relatively small in comparison. The Roman army encamped about a mile from the city. It just so happened that it was the middle of the harvesting season, and luckily the Roman army was composed mostly of small farmers. They were still unable to supply large armies so far away from home, and they were already running low on supplies. The Romans seized the opportunity and scattered around the fields to gather as much food as they could find. Hannibal, seeing that the Roman camp was poorly defended, rushed outside of the city hoping to catch them off guard. The foragers couldn't offer any resistance to the Carthaginians, and they scattered, leaving the path to the camp wide open. According to an old Roman tradition, a small token force was placed outside of the camp. These men were oath-bound to keep their position, with death awaiting any man who dared to leave his post. Although heavily outnumbered, the token force managed to hold their ground and even rebuffed the attackers.
Oh, dang.
The Romans then chased them all the way back to the city, inflicting further casualties on the small garrison. Following this altercation, both sides changed their approach. The Romans were much more wary of raiding parties in the future, and the foragers were escorted by a large force.
The raiding and the foraging and raiding upon foraging, it's just harassment. It not really decisive, but it's kind of like wearing down the other side psychologically at its base, but also, I guess, in numbers slowly over time.
On the other hand, Hannibal couldn't risk further losses to his garrison, and he refused to leave the protection of his walls.
So it's a siege!
In ancient warfare, there were a couple of ways of taking a city. The first, and by far the easiest, was by treachery. Often a group or a single person, unhappy with the current leadership, would aid the attackers with their assault.
Let them in a gate, give them intel, sneak someone in. Basically, treason.
Leaving the defenders dumbfounded. Such betrayals were surprisingly common in the fickle world of city-state politics.
Oh, yeah.
According
And I forget, what was it? They did this a ton. It's escaping me, but they did this earlier in one of the city-states in Etrusca. I forget which one it was.
to some accounts, as many as half the cities taken during the Punic Wars involved some kind of treachery. If there was no disgruntled party in the city, the attackers were left with 2 options. They could either storm the city or besiege it. Taking the city by storm was a perilous affair and the casualties were abundant. The defenders held the upper hand and could protect the city with far fewer men. Attackers had to use ladders or later siege towers to climb the walls, while they were showered with arrows and stones from above. Conversely, they could try to break open the doors with battering rams, or dig underneath the walls to circumvent them altogether. The Romans would eventually master all of these approaches, but for now they lacked the means and the know-how to take a city as large as Agrigentum. That meant that they were forced into the third and final approach, besieging the city. Luckily, Agrigentum wasn't a port town, as the Romans lacked the naval power required to blockade the port. The Romans encircled Agrigentum and built 2 camps on opposite sides with each consul commanding 1 camp.
That's a huge deal. Both consuls are a part of this siege. Big deal.
They built 2 sets of fortifications, one to defend them from any advances from the city, and the other to defend them from any army coming to aid the city.
Okay.
Guards were posted along the whole perimeter in order to stop any attempts of resupplying the city from the outside. The besiegers had to hold out until the city ran out of food and surrendered. Roman allies were in charge of providing supplies and other materials needed for sustaining the siege. Small nearby town Herbessus was chosen as a supply base, and all the resources were gathered there. For 5 months the 2 sides were at a stalemate. Agrigentum was running low on supplies, and Hannibal sent messengers pleading for urgent aid. The Carthaginians were amassing their forces in Heraclea Minoa under the leadership of Hanno. Diodorus claims that Hanno commanded 50,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 war elephants, giving him a numerical advantage over the Romans. Instead of engaging the Romans directly, Hanno opted for taking Herbessus and all the supplies stored there. This put the Roman army in a dire situation. Soon the troops grew exhausted and malnourished.
And a siege can actually be, as he's alluding to, it can be a war of attrition on both sides. You have the people inside the siege, inside the city, who are going to be malnourished. It's going to be fluttering with disease and malnutrition, but also in the camp sieging, because they're also waiting this out. And then you have supply line issues, and you have disease and just psychological trauma almost from all this.
With diseases starting to spread,
Yeah.
they would even have to lift the siege and pull back, were it not for Hiero, who managed to supply the armies with great effort. Seeing
That was a great diplomatic move then to align with Syracuse.
that the time was ripe for an assault, Hanno advanced from Heraclea. He ordered his Numidian cavalry to engage the Romans and then fall back to the rest of the army. When the Numidians reached the Roman camp, the cavalry rushed out and a small skirmish was fought.
Have at thee!
The Numidians then retreated with Romans in hot pursuit. When they reached the rest of the Punic force, the Numidians turned around and encircled the Romans. A great number of men were killed, with the rest retreating back to the camp.
And remember, Carthage and Rome are very, they're neck and neck in strength at this point.
When Hanno reached Agrigentum, he constructed his camp about a mile away from the Romans. For 2 months nothing changed, as both sides were avoiding open conflict. Eventually, the famine in Agrigentum forced Carthaginians to act, and the Romans, who were themselves on the verge of starvation, happily answered the challenge. The Romans marched out in a conventional 3-line formation adopted during the Samnite Wars. Hanno organized his men into 2 lines, with the second line acting as a reserve. He placed the elephants in the second line. The cavalry of both
I still remember, put the elephants in front! You know.
Both sides was presumably placed on the wings. A long and grueling battle was fought, and in the end, the Punic first line was broken and put to flight. This unorganized retreat broke the resolve of the second line, and they too joined the flight. In this commotion, the elephants were scared, and the Carthaginians lost control.
And remember, Rome got their first taste with elephants with Pyrrhus.
It's reported that most of the elephants, along with Hanno's camp, were captured by the Romans. When the night fell, the Romans, exhausted by the battle and subsequent celebrations, failed to post sentries. Hannibal and the remnants of his small garrison snuck outside of the city and fled to Heraclea. In the morning, the Romans entered Agrigentum unopposed. The city was plundered, and a great number of men was sold into slavery. According to Diodorus, the Carthaginians lost 3,000 men, with a further 4,000 captured, while the Romans lost as many as 30,000. But this is out of 100,000 men who were part of the siege of Agrigentum.
Dang.
Despite these staggering numbers, the Battle of Agrigentum was a great Roman success.
One thing that Rome does have as an advantage is the numbers, always.
According to Polybius, it convinced the Senate to expand their war aims from simply securing Messana to completely expelling the Carthaginians from Sicily. To accomplish this, the Romans would have to build a great naval fleet.
Yeah.
Although Hanno is often criticized for his use of elephants, we shouldn't be too harsh on him. This is the first recorded instance of elephants being used by the Carthaginians in battle. Perhaps they haven't yet developed the best tactics for utilizing the great beasts. He is also criticized for his failure to control the two lines, but we should note that Hanno was commanding a force of fresh recruits. His mercenaries were a mix of multiple nationalities.
So it's hard to command people of different nationalities, maybe different languages, different... You haven't worked together as much, they're recruits, yeah.
And they would yet have to learn to cooperate. This battle was one of only 2 pitched battles fought in Sicily in the 24 years of the First Punic War. The rugged terrain of the island is unsuitable for maneuvering large armies. In contrast to the Second Punic War, which was marked by several large-scale battles, the First Punic War was mostly a series of sieges from both sides. Sicily was dotted with a great number of walled cities that controlled the surrounding areas. These cities were the key to taking Sicily. This meant that fighting a pitched battle carried many risks with it, while it would provide only a limited gain for the victors. A large number of troops employed by both sides had to be stationed inside the cities as garrisons, and they couldn't be used in open battles. The war in Sicily was now grounded to a halt. The Romans held superiority on land, and many inland cities sided with them, while the Carthaginians were unchallenged on the sea, and many port towns sided with them instead.
It's like... It reminds me of the Napoleonic Wars, where the British had naval superiority, but the French had ground superiority. Similar, very similar.
Frequent Punic raids in Italy put a further strain on Rome. It was now clear that the Romans would have to take to the seas. While first crossing to Messana, the Romans had to borrow ships from their allies, namely Tarentum, Naples, and Locri. This just shows how the Romans were unprepared for this undertaking.
Remember, those are Italian allies, not necessarily Rome.
Luckily, during that crossing, one of the Carthaginian ships that was patrolling the area ventured too close to shore and ran aground. The Romans captured this ship and studied it in order to make copies. This was one of the quinqueremes, the top-of-the-line ship of the ancient Mediterranean. The name quinquereme is Latin for 5 oars, but this is a misnomer. The oars were not arranged in groups of 5, but rather the oarsmen. Oars were placed in sets of 3, one above the other. 2 men controlled each of the top 2 oars, with 1 man controlling the bottom oar.
Interesting.
Quinquereme had a crew of 300 rowers with a further 120 men positioned on deck. The ships were equipped with metal rams placed on the bow at sea level.
So really you had one kind of like fighting stance, which is ramming, and then boarding and fighting.
The primary tactic used in sea battles at the time was ramming enemy ships, breaking their hulls and sinking them. This meant that the crews had to be exceedingly skilled in maneuvering the ships. All ancient vessels were somewhat unstable and vulnerable to bad weather. The Romans will soon learn this the hard way. After studying the shipwreck,
they brought it into the Senate now.
Senate ordered 100 quinqueremes and 20 triremes, a smaller but more nimble variant built. Although inexperienced at first, the Roman carpenters and woodworkers would soon get used to producing these large ships, and their quality steadily increased.
By the way, if you know, let me know. Would they like secure public funds for this? I forget how they did that.
It's unclear where this Herculean task took place, but some authors placed it in Ostia, close to direct supervision from Rome. While the ships were under construction, the Romans recruited 30,000 men and trained them as sailors.
Wow.
Polybius recounts the story of Romans sitting on dry land arranged as if they were on actual ships. They were then trained to swing their bodies back and forth in unison, with their hands mimicking the position of the oars. According to Pliny, the entire fleet was ready in just 60 days.
Wow.
For the first time in 260 BC, the Romans...
I can't even imagine that. But they said 60 days, we'll go with it.
...set sail with their armada, commanded by Consul Admiral Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio. During the Samnite Wars and the Pyrrhic War, the Romans showed great resilience. After each defeat, the Romans would come back stronger. Losing entire armies was just a minor setback for them.
Foreshadowing.
These wars were somewhat defensive in nature, and Romans showed that Rome would stand as long as there were Romans who could carry arms. With this fleet, their capacity for aggressive expansion was put on full display. Furthermore, the construction of an entire fleet from a single captured shipwreck is another instance of Roman adaptability. Each time that the Romans faced mightier opponents, they would study the tactics and equipment used by their enemies and adopt them, eventually even surpassing them. While waiting for the rest of the fleet, Scipio led an advance party of 17 ships to make preparations in Messana. On his way there, he heard a rumor that the citizens of Lipara were ready to betray the Punic garrison stationed there. Lipara
I forget there's little islands right here.
was the most important port in the small group of islands lying
The Aeolian Islands, that's what they're called.
north of Sicily. These islands held great strategic importance as they controlled the crossing from Italy to Sicily. Hoping to score an easy victory, Scipio sailed his small squadron to Lipara and occupied the harbor. At the time, Hannibal Gisco was positioned in Panormus with his fleet. When he heard the news of the Roman fleet, he sent 20 of his own ships. They arrived at night and trapped the Romans inside the harbor. Some of the inexperienced sailors panicked and abandoned the ships. Those who remained couldn't offer any meaningful resistance, and Scipio, along with his officers, was captured. For his failures, Scipio was given the nickname Asina, meaning donkey. This nickname was doubly insulting, considering that Asina was the feminine form of the word.
Oh my. Yeah.
Despite this, Scipio was later ransomed and served again as consul in 254.
Oh.
Not to be outdone by his Roman counterpart, Hannibal soon fell into a trap of his own. While carrying out a reconnaissance mission, he and his fleet rounded the tip of the Italian boot and stumbled upon the whole of the Roman navy. Carthaginians lost most of their 50 ships, but Hannibal managed to escape. These small setbacks did nothing to deter either side from seeking a greater engagement on the seas.
It probably exacerbated it.
Although victorious, the Romans realized that neither their ships nor their men were capable of fighting the Punic fleet head-on. Ramming maneuvers were difficult to perform on the sea, and the Carthaginians with their long naval tradition could easily outmaneuver the Romans.
Are we already going to get on to the technology they advanced? Which is like I don't want to give it away, but they had technology.
On the other hand, the Romans were masters of land warfare, and the Carthaginian sailors had no chance if faced with a trained legionnaire. So naturally, someone in the Roman ranks got the bright idea of turning naval warfare into a regular land engagement.
Okay, here we go.
Every Roman ship was equipped with an 11-meter long
That's it.
Wooden drawbridge named corvus, meaning raven. One side of the corvus was fixed to the ship's bow, while the other side was fitted with a large metal spike. The corvus could rotate freely around the front of the ship, and when an enemy vessel approached, the Romans would drop it on the unsuspecting target. The large spike would then penetrate the deck of the ship and lodge itself in, creating a bridge between the two ships. Marines stationed on the deck would then quickly cross the bridge and attack the poorly equipped sailors. Although the corvus saw spectacular success during the First Punic War, it would be retired even before its conclusion. With years, the Roman sailors would gain
Why would it be retired? I don't know why.
enough experience and their naval tactics would improve, rendering the corvus obsolete.
Oh, okay.
The inventor of the corvus was lost to history, but it's believed that he was Sicilian Greek. Possibly even the young Archimedes, who was 27.
That's a stretch. Even though Archimedes would obviously is a crazy guy for the Second Punic War, Syracuse and the Siege of Syracuse. That's an interesting one. That's a stretch. I don't know. That would be a hard conflation.
At the time, but there is no more than circumstantial evidence for this. When the second consul, Gaius Duilius, got news of Asina's failure, he abandoned his land forces and took control of the armada. The Romans were now eager to put the corvus to the test, and when they heard the news of the Carthaginian navy plundering the countryside near Mylae, they rushed off to meet them. The Carthaginians were as eager as the Romans for the fight, believing that their superior experience would prevail. When they spotted the Romans on the horizon, the whole fleet, numbering 130 warships, charged without hesitation. Hannibal sailed at the head of the fleet, commanding a large flagship that was captured from King Pyrrhus years earlier. The Carthaginians didn't bother to sail in formation, but rather raced each other, wanting to be the first to make contact with the Romans. Although the Carthaginians were confused by the appearance of the corvus, they sailed on, not suspecting anything.
Not suspecting anything is kind of crazy.
The first line quickly reached the Romans, and even though some of them were rammed, each Carthaginian ship was successfully hit with a corvus. Marines quickly swarmed the immobilized vessels and took them with ease. All 30 ships that first made contact were taken.
That's an insane ratio.
Seeing what had happened, the rest of the fleet panicked. They swung around and tried to
Routed.
ram Roman ships from the sides.
Oh,
But this too was unsuccessful, as the Corvus was easily rotated and every Punic ship that got too close was hit. Once hit, they quickly fell to the Marines. Realizing that they were utterly outmatched, the surviving ships turned around and fled. Even though the flagship was one of the first to fall to the Roman Corvus, Hannibal escaped yet again.
how?
The Battle of Mylae, the first real naval engagement between the Romans and the Carthaginians, was a spectacular Roman victory. Out of the 130 Punic ships, 50 were sunk or captured. The greatest navy of the Mediterranean was defeated by a Roman fleet created only months prior, and all thanks to the ingenuity of the Raven. A victory column commemorating this battle was erected in the Forum by Duilius. The inscription on the column, which survives in fragments to this day,
That's cool.
praises Duilius in the usual boastful manner of the aristocracy. Despite this outstanding victory, Duilius never again held military command. Hannibal was once again spared execution, but his streak of good fortune was at an end. 2 years later, he led a fleet to Sardinia, but he was blockaded there by the Romans and lost a large number of ships. His men finally mutinied and executed him on the beach. Victory at Mylae reinvigorated the Romans, and it was
Another big territory swab.
followed by a string of victories in Sicily. The Roman fleet now changed focus from engaging the Carthaginians to aiding the land armies in Sicily. It was only by chance that the two fleets clashed again in 257. The fleets were sailing off the coast of Sicily near Tyndaris, probably unaware of each other's movements. The consul Gaius Atilius Regulus was sailing in front of the rest of his fleet with a squadron of 10 ships, and when they spotted the Carthaginians, they rushed forth to meet them. Although taken by surprise, the Carthaginian navy had a numerical advantage, and 9 out of the 10 Roman ships were sunk.
So we're at an impasse.
Only the consul, standing on the fastest and best manned vessel, managed to escape. It was now turn for the Carthaginians to overextend, and they engaged the rest of the Roman fleet.
And then the Raven's gonna come down.
10 Punic ships were captured and 8 were sunk. The rest of the fleet was unwilling to commit to a large-scale battle, and they withdrew to Lipari.
So it looks like advantaged Rome at this point in the war.
We should now return to the land forces waging war in Sicily. The Romans continued their tradition of electing new consuls each year. These consuls would then take over command of the armies from their predecessors. On the other hand, the Carthaginians were much more pragmatic about their military command. Hanno, who led the Punic army in the Battle of Agrigentum, was replaced by Hamilcar. This was not the famous Hamilcar Barca, who would soon enter this story.
So many confusing names.
The Carthaginian commanders would stay in power for years on end, gaining valuable experience and the trust of the army. It's unclear if each Roman consul
But and by the way, I say confusing names. Rome is the master of confusing names.
brought with him a new batch of fresh troops, or if the troops campaigned on Sicily for several years at a time. What is certain is that Romans had deployed much more troops on the island than their Punic counterparts. Each year the Roman casualties were easily replaced by fresh recruits, while the Carthaginian generals often lacked the necessary manpower and their losses were harder to replace.
And it seems like, maybe I'm just overthinking it, maybe I'm underthinking it. It seems like it'd be easier not just to replace the Romans because of the numbers, but because of the proximity to the boot. Like, look how close the boot is to Messana.
When Hamilcar took control of the land armies in 259, he quickly scored 2 notable victories. Due to a disagreement between the Romans and their allies, the two armies separated. The smaller allied army, of about 6,000 men, was encamped far from the main force. Hamilcar learned of this and brought his whole force onto the Roman allies. Some 4,000 men were killed. He then proceeded to take the cities of Camarina and Enna that sided with Rome back in 263.
Wow.
A small fraction of the population in each city defected and admitted his armies inside the city walls. This, however, was short-lived, as next year Enna again defected back to the Romans, while Camarina was taken by siege.
Very similar to like the Second Punic War, where the cities defect and go back and forth, even though those are cities in Italia I'm speaking of.
The Romans were improving their siege techniques, but they were still no match for the Hellenistic armies, who excelled in siegecraft. It's possible that Hiero provided siege engines and experts needed for this undertaking. The Carthaginian army was wintering in Panormus, waiting for the next campaigning season. The Roman commanders brought their entire army in front of the city, but the Carthaginians refused to fight. Unable to take such a large city, the Romans abandoned the siege and proceeded to take several other smaller towns in the area. Seeing that the war couldn't be ended in the rugged terrain of Sicily, the Romans opted for a more radical approach. In 256, the consuls decided to mount a full-scale land invasion of Africa and bring war to Carthage itself.
Oh.
But before that could be undertaken, the seas to Carthage would have to be cleared in the largest naval battle in history. Join us next time as we discuss the Battle of Cape Acnomus.
I don't want to speak too ahead of the game. But there was Roman fleets that were decimated in the sea. Not by Carthage, but by nature. I hope that's in the next episode. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any other context to this. Love Magistra Vitae. I talked a lot during this video, so I don't really have much of a recap. And the Punic War will continue the next time we see each other. Until next time, peace out. Bye-bye.